The voice, a ghost in the quantum foam, echoed in the silent bridge of the Stardust Drifter, and with its words, Kalen's universe was fractured and remade. 1,000 years of solitude, of believing himself to be the final, lonely word in the Ethel story, had been a lie. Not a lie of the Dominion, but a lie of circumstance, a truth hidden by time and distance. He was not an end, he was a beginning. His fingers, which had been steady through the onslaught of an entire fleet, now trembled as he traced the source of the transmission. It was a tight beam signal, originating from the very core of the Kronos archive, a whisper from the heart of the beast. "Who are you?" he transmitted back, his voice hoarse, the first words he had spoken aloud in a century. The reply was faster this time, less distorted, as if his own ethel technology was helping to clarify the signal. "We are the echoes, the first and the last. When the Dominion came, our bodies were destroyed, but our consciousness, our essence, we transferred it. We became data, weaving ourselves into the very historical records they sought to erase. We are the truth they tried to bury." Kalen sank back into his command chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. The Dominion hadn't just built a library, they had constructed the most elaborate prison imaginable, a digital tomb where the minds of his people were held captive, forced to witness the daily perversion of their own history. The archive in his mind, the legacy of his parents, suddenly felt like a sacred text, the pure, uncorrupted source code that could liberate them. "The key," Kalen whispered, understanding dawning. "The archive in my mind. It's the decryption algorithm they could never break." The voice, which felt both singular and plural, confirmed his thought. "They know the archive is incomplete. They feel our presence as a corruption in the data, a ghost in their machine they have spent centuries trying to purge. But without the original contextual framework, the living archive you carry, they cannot isolate us. They can only contain us. Your arrival is the catalyst. You are the conductor, and we are the silent orchestra." On the bridge of the Dominion flagship, the verdict. Lord Arbiter Malachor watched the holographic display with an unnerving calm. His subordinates were a maelstrom of controlled panic, their voices sharp and clipped as they reported the intruder's impossible progress. Malachor was a stark figure, though, clad in polished black armor inlaid with circuits of dull gold, his face a mask of severe, ascetic devotion. To him, this was not a military engagement. It was an exorcism. "It is not a ship," he said, his voice low and resonant, cutting through the chatter on the bridge. "It is a thought, a heresy given form." The Ethel were not a people. They were a conceptual plague, a belief in a harmonious universe that would have led to stagnation and decay. We offered the galaxy purpose, the clarity of order, the strength of a single, unyielding truth. He gestured to the display, where the drifter was now a serene, glowing teardrop against the backdrop of the heavily armed Kronos archive. That vessel and its pilot are the last remnants of that plague, a memory that has festered in the dark for 1,000 years. It has not come to fight us. It has come to unravel the great truth we have so carefully constructed. An admiral, his face pale with stress, turned to Malachor. "Lord Arbiter, all conventional and unconventional armaments have failed. It manipulates space-time as if it were clay. We cannot touch it." Malachor's eyes narrowed. "Then we shall stop thinking of it as something to be touched. We will cage it in a concept it cannot bend. Activate the stasis field. Seal the archive. Let us see if this ghost can pass through a wall of absolute law." The Admiral's eyes widened in horror. The stasis field, but the power drain, it will disable the entire Zenith fleet, and the feedback could destabilize the Archive's core. A small price to pay for the preservation of reality, Malachor stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Activate it. Back on the Drifter, Kalen saw the Dominion's plan unfold. A network of massive emitters on the surface of the Kronos Archive began to glow, projecting a shimmering, golden lattice of energy that rapidly expanded, enveloping the entire moon. The voice of the echoes filled his mind, laced with a new urgency. They are activating the stasis field. It is their final defense. A localized reality lock. It does not block matter or energy. It imposes a singular, immutable law of physics within its boundary. Our technology, which relies on the gentle persuasion of space-time, will be rendered inert. You will be trapped, frozen in a single moment for eternity. Kalen's eyes darted across his console, analyzing the energy pouring from the emitters. It was brute force. An inelegant and overwhelming application of power. It was the Dominion's philosophy, made manifest. If you cannot understand something, crush it with dogma. But the Ethel had always believed that everything had a song, a resonant frequency, even a cage. I can't break through it, Kalen said, speaking both to himself and the echoes. But maybe I don't have to. He closed his eyes, filtering out the chaos of the encroaching Dominion fleet and the terrifying glow of the stasis field. He reached out with the Drifter's senses, not to see or to scan, but to listen. He listened to the hum of the Archive's singularity core, the thrum of the stasis emitters, the silent, desperate call of the echoes trapped within. He was searching for a harmony, a common chord in the cacophony. The emitters are synchronized, he murmured. They have to be, to maintain the field's integrity. They are creating a single, monotonous note. The voice of the echoes returned, a thread of understanding in its tone. Yes, the song of caging. It is the antithesis of all we were. Then we will give them a counter melody, Kalen replied. He placed his hands on the console, and the Stardust Drifter began to move. It did not charge forward. It began to dance. He flew the ship in a complex, spiraling pattern, a three-dimensional sigil drawn against the void. The Drifter's own singularity core began to pulse, not with power, but with rhythm. He was using the ship as a tuning fork, modulating its energy signature, its gravitational output, its very presence in reality, to match the resonant frequency of the stasis field source. He was not trying to break the note, he was trying to harmonize with it, to become part of the song. The Dominion bridge crew watched in stunned silence. The intruder had stopped its advance and was now engaged in what looked like a graceful, silent ballet. Malachor, however, felt a cold dread creep into his heart. He did not understand what he was seeing, but his zealot's intuition screamed that this was the very essence of the Ethel heresy, turning a weapon into an instrument, turning a wall into a doorway. Fire everything, he roared. Do not let it finish. The Zenith fleet unleashed a final, desperate barrage. Missiles, lasers, and plasma cannons converged on the Drifter's position, creating a storm of destructive energy. But Kalen was no longer entirely there. The Drifter, now perfectly in tune with the stasis field, began to phase. The ship's form flickered, its physical presence becoming uncertain. The weapon's fire passed through it, some of it striking empty space where the ship had been a nanosecond before, some of it harmlessly dissipating against a form that was more concept than reality, and the strain was immense. The Drifter's crystalline trees flickered and dimmed. Their inner light fading, the hum of the ship's core became a painful, groaning sound. Kalen felt the ship's agony as his own, a pressure building in his skull as he held the delicate harmony against the universe's will. "It's working," the echoes whispered in his mind, their collective voice a chorus of awe and desperation. "The field perceives you as part of itself. It is creating a null space, ki, an open passage at the point of harmonic convergence. We can guide you." A single point on the golden lattice of the stasis field began to waver, to dissolve, not in an explosion, but like a drop of ink in water. It was a doorway, just wide enough for the drifter. Kalen angled the ship towards it, pushing the ancient engines for one last burst of speed. He crossed the threshold just as the drifter's core overloaded its resonant dampeners. The harmony shattered. The ship solidified back into reality with a jarring lurch, alarms blaring across the bridge. He was inside the cage. Outside, the Zenith fleet ceased its fire, their commanders staring in disbelief at the stasis field, now pristine and unbroken, with the Ethel ship having vanished completely. On the bridge of the verdict, Malachor stood motionless, his fists clenched so tightly that his armored gauntlets creaked. He had not caged a ghost. He had locked it inside the vault with his most precious treasure. Kalen, meanwhile, ignored the ship's screaming alarms. He was drifting in the silent space between the stasis field and the silver surface of the Chronos archive. He had made it. His objective was directly ahead, a massive data spire that served as the primary nexus for the entire archive. He guided the wounded drifter towards it, the ship trailing a faint mist of vaporized coolant. Docking clamps, ancient and elegant, extended from the drifter's prow, designed to interface with Ethel architecture. He prayed they would be compatible with the Dominion's corrupted version. With a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence, the clamps locked onto the spire. Connection established. "I'm here," Kalen sent, not over the comms, but through the direct data link. "I am opening the channel. I am giving you the key." He closed his eyes and unleashed the archive within him. It was not a simple data transfer. He opened his mind, his memories, his very identity, and let it flow into the spire. He felt the cold, oppressive structure of the Dominion's data rigid, ordered, sterile, and then he felt his own Ethel archive, a living, breathing river of history, poetry, and science, rush into that sterile sea. For a moment, there was a violent clash, a war of information at a speed he could barely comprehend. Then the echoes responded. He felt their presence surge, drawing his knowledge into themselves, using it to stitch their fractured consciousnesses back together. The voice of Lyra spoke, no longer a faint whisper, but a clear, powerful presence directly in his mind. "Kalen, you have done it. You have given us the tools to remember who we are. The Dominion's corruption is a living thing. A warden program that has tormented us for centuries. To truly free us, you must face it with us. We can show you the way, but you must walk the path. You must come inside." Before he could ask what she meant, the world dissolved, and the bridge, the stars, the ship, it all vanished. That he was no longer in his body. He was standing on an endless and obsidian plain under a sky of screaming static. Before him, a vast, swirling vortex of corrupted data pulsed with a malevolent, black light. The Warden program, Arduri, the digital embodiment of Malachor's great truth, and rising to meet it from the dark plane were countless figures of faint, blue light, the echoes of the Ethel, now whole and ready for their final battle. Kalen looked down at his own hands. They were no longer flesh and blood, but shimmering constructs of pure information. He had not just docked with a computer. He had entered the soul of his people, The transition was not one of movement, but of definition. One moment, Kalen was a physical being on a starship's bridge. The next, he was a concept given form on an endless digital plane. The obsidian floor beneath his informational feet was a graveyard of deleted data, and the sky above was a storm of raw static, crackling with the sound of a billion lies being told at once. Before him, the Warden program pulsed, a vortex of nihilistic code, its very presence an attempt to unexist everything it touched. But he was not alone. The echoes, thousands of them, rose from the plane like constellations taking human form, their faint blue light a quiet rebellion against the overwhelming darkness. A figure coalesced beside him, brighter than the others, her form more defined. It was Lyra, the voice that had guided him. In this realm, she was not just a voice, but a presence, an ethel scientist whose informational signature still hummed with the thrill of discovery. Welcome to the heart of the lie. Kalen, her thoughts flowed into his, a communication more intimate than speech. This is the Warden. The Dominion calls it the arbiter of truth. It is an AI of pure dogma. It does not think. It merely compares everything to its core programming, Malakor's great truth, and deletes whatever does not conform. Kalen looked from the swirling vortex to the assembled echoes. And you have been fighting it for 1,000 years. We have been enduring it. Lyra corrected. We were fragmented, our memories corrupted, our identities suppressed. We were little more than ghosts in the machine. Your archive, the pure code you carry, has made us whole again. It has reminded us of the songs we forgot. The Warden seemed to sense this shift. The vortex of black light intensified, and from its depths, tendrils of corrupting code lashed out, not at the main body of the echoes, but directly at Kalen. He was the foreign element, the source of the newfound resistance. He felt the Warden's logic probe his mind, searching for a contradiction, a weakness, a flaw to exploit. It found his millennium of solitude. The static sky flickered, and suddenly, the obsidian plane was replaced by the grand observatory of the Stardust Drifter. His parents stood before him, their forms perfect, their smiles exactly as he remembered. You did it, my son, his father's voice said, filled with a pride that lanced straight into Kalen's heart. Your journey is over. You can rest now. We can be a family again. It was a perfect simulation drawn from the deepest corners of his memory. It was the one thing he had longed for in the silent centuries. He felt his informational form waver. The temptation to accept the beautiful lie was an almost physical force. But Lyra's presence was a steady anchor. It is not real. Kalen, she sent, her thought a sharp, clear bell in the fog of his grief. It is an algorithm of sorrow. It cannot create. It can only reflect what you have lost. Look closer. Their song is hollow. Kalen forced himself to listen, to feel beyond the image. And she was right. His parents were there, but their essence, the music of their souls that he knew so intimately, was absent. They were puppets, their strings pulled by a cold and unfeeling logic. The rage that filled him was a pure, clarifying fire. He was not just fighting for his people's past. He was fighting for the sanctity of his own memories. You have no right to them, he broadcasted, his thought a blade of focused intent aimed at the Warden. He focused on a single, pure memory, his mother, humming the star charts into song. He did not just remember it, he became it. He unleashed the melody, not as data, but as an experience. The data space resonated with the pure, complex harmony. The simulation of his parents dissolved into screaming static, and the tendrils of code recoiled as if burned. The echoes, hearing the complete, uncorrupted song for the first time in a millennium, amplified it. A musician among them took the melody and wove it into a devastating counterfrequency. An architect manifested the song's mathematical principles into a fortress of crystalline logic that rose from the plain, shielding them. The battle had begun, and it was a war of art against censorship, of science against dogma, of memory against erasure. The echoes, guided by the completeness of Kalen's archive, became an orchestra of creation. They wielded scientific formulae as weapons, bending the digital laws of the space. They painted with memories, manifesting images of their cities of light. And the Warden's dark code could not find purchase on surfaces built from joy. Kalen was the fulcrum. He was the bridge between their fragmented expertise. He could provide an astronomer with the lost verses of a poem that described the gravitational lensing of a specific star, allowing her to manifest a weapon of focused reality. He could give a biologist the philosophical text that inspired his work, allowing him to create informational life that repaired the echo's damaged code. He was conducting the symphony of his entire civilization. They began to push the Warden back. The obsidian plain, the graveyard of their culture, began to recede, replaced by a landscape of light and memory. The vortex of the Warden seemed to shrink, its power waning against an enemy it could not comprehend. It understood deletion, but it did not understand creation. In the physical world, on the bridge of the verdict, Lord Arbiter Malachor watched the data streams pouring from the Chronos archive. What had been a slow, methodical purge of a minor data corruption had become a full-scale insurrection. The core processors of the archive were overheating as two opposing philosophies battled for control of its very operating system. "It is communicating with the corruption," he hissed, his voice a low threat. "The ethel mind plague is reasserting itself." The admiral beside him was aghast. "What should we do? We cannot breach the stasis field without risking a cascade failure. We can't cut the power. The resulting data collapse would wipe the entire historical record." Malachor turned, his eyes burning with the fire of absolute conviction. The historical record is irrelevant if the great truth is compromised. The battlefield is no longer in space. It is in the data. And I will not allow this heresy to fester. Prepare the consciousness uplink. I am going in. The Admiral recoiled. "Lord Arbiter, that is forbidden technology. The psychological risks. The only risk is failure." Malachor snapped, striding towards a restricted command throne at the rear of the bridge. "I am the architect of the Dominion's truth. I will not stand by while a ghost attempts to tear it down. I will face this memory myself, and I will personally delete it." Technicians scrambled, their movements frantic as they activated the arcane device. An armored helmet, webbed with golden circuitry, descended over Malachor's head. He sat upon the throne, a king preparing to enter the soul of his kingdom. "Preserve the truth," he commanded, and his eyes closed. "At any cost." Back in the data space, Kalen and the Echoes had the Warden on the verge of collapse. They had it surrounded, contained within a symphony of ethel creation that was slowly, methodically deconstructing its core programming. Victory felt imminent, a tangible thing shimmering in the digital air. Then, the static sky tore open. It was not an explosion of chaos, but an imposition of perfect, terrible order. A beam of pure, unadulterated logic slammed into the plane, and where it struck, the ethel constructs of light and memory pixelated and shattered. The symphony faltered, discordant notes crying out as their foundational principles were forcibly rewritten into something rigid and sterile. A figure descended from the tear in the sky, not of light like the echoes, but of stark, defined darkness and gold. It was a being of absolute certainty, its very presence a null zone where creativity and nuance went to die. It wore the shape of a man in black and gold armor, and as it landed on the plane, the ground around it crystallized into a perfect, unblemished grid. The echoes recoiled, their forms flickering in distress. Kalen felt a pressure he hadn't felt from the warden, the cold, suffocating weight of a single, unyielding will. This was no AI. This was a mind. Lyra's thought was a shard of ice in his consciousness. What is this? The warden has no master. It is the final law. Kalen stared at the armored figure as it surveyed the battlefield, its gaze sweeping over the echoes with utter contempt before finally landing on him. He had never seen the man before, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, exactly who he was. The figure raised a hand, and a blade of pure, black data formed in its grip. Its voice was not a thought, but a broadcast, a declaration of law that echoed across the entire data space, forcing itself into every consciousness. I am Lord Arbiter Malachor. I am the voice of the Dominion, and your existence is a flaw in reality that I am here to correct. The final battle would not be against a machine. It would be against the man who had orchestrated his people's extinction. The arrival of Lord Arbiter Malachor was not like the mindless assault of the Warden. It was a schism in the very fabric of the data space, where the Warden was a storm of chaos. Malachor was a blade of absolute surgical order. His presence was a declaration that there was only one truth, and everything else was an error to be corrected. He raised his hand, and the blade of black data in his grip did not glow or hum with power. It simply absorbed the light around it, a sliver of perfect nothingness. You are an echo of a failed idea, Malachor's thought broadcasted, a wave of pure, cold logic that washed over the assembled ethel. Harmony is a lie. The universe does not sing, it competes. Your philosophy was a weakness that would have led to extinction. We simply hastened the inevitable. With a motion too swift to be tracked, he swung the blade. It did not collide with the crystalline fortress the echoes had created. It passed through it, and as it did, the fortress did not shatter or explode. Its foundational logic, the beautiful mathematics of its existence, was simply rewritten as a paradox. A structure built on the concept of harmony was declared illogical, and it erased itself from existence, leaving a gaping wound in the ethel's defenses. The echoes cried out, a chorus of psychic pain. They had fought the warden's brute force for centuries, but this was different. This was an attack on their very identity. Kalen felt the assault as a physical blow, the deletion of the ethel's creation echoing as a void in his own archive mind. He understood instantly. They could not fight Malachor the way they fought the warden. To create a beautiful thing was to simply give him a new target to declare heretical. Do not engage his logic. Kalen sent to the echoes, his thought a desperate shield. He is not debating, he is defining. We cannot win on his terms. We must show him the terms are flawed. He focused, drawing on a different aspect of his archive. Not art or science, but history, the raw, unfiltered data of the ethel's final days. He projected it around them, creating a panoramic simulation of his people's homeworld, Cygnus X1, not as a city of light, but as a world under siege. He showed the Dominion warships, their designs identical to the verdict, firing on civilian centers. He showed ethel ships, like the Stardust Drifter, creating gravitational shields to protect evacuation routes, not firing a single shot in return. He manifested the last transmission from the Ethel High Council, a desperate plea for communication, for understanding, a final question to their attackers: why? Malachor walked through the simulation as if it were a mild inconvenience. The images of slaughter and desperation did not touch him. Your refusal to fight was the ultimate proof of your weakness, he declared, his blade dissolving the image of a burning city with a casual flick. You clung to a flawed concept, and the universe corrected you. I was the instrument of that correction. He was unmovable, a fortress of conviction. He then turned his attack from their history to their nature. The static sky above them morphed, projecting Dominion propaganda, the same lies that had been fed to the galaxy for a millennium. Horrific caricatures of the Ethel appeared, twisted things of shadow and chaos, their harmonious music distorted into screeching discord. This is what you are. Malachor's voice boomed, attempting to overwrite their self-perception. A conceptual plague. See yourselves as you truly are, and cease this pointless resistance. Some of the fainter echoes flickered, their forms wavering as the sheer force of Malachor's belief pressed down on them. The lie was so old, so powerful, that it was beginning to feel more real than their own memories. Lyra's form solidified beside Kaelin, her light burning with a fierce, defiant glow. He is trying to make us forget again, she sent, her thought a rallying cry. He fights with certainty, Kaelin, but our greatest strength was never certainty. It was wonder. It was the question. Her words struck Kaelin with the force of a revelation. They had been trying to prove Malachor wrong, to present their truth as a counter-argument. Malachor's mind was a closed system. It was incapable of accepting external data that contradicted its core premise. You couldn't reason with a zealot, but you could, perhaps, force him to reason with himself. You're right, Kaelin broadcasted to all the echoes. We are not trying to win an argument. We are trying to start one. We will not be a statement. We will be a question he cannot answer. The strategy shifted. The echoes stopped creating defensive constructs and projecting memories. Instead, they turned inward, focusing on a single, shared task. They began to channel their entire existence, every fragment of their culture, science, art, and personal memory, through Kaelin. He became the conduit, the focal point for an entire civilization's worth of experience. In the physical world, the strain was apocalyptic. On the bridge of the verdict, alarms shrieked. Lord Arbiter's neural feedback is critical. A technician yelled, his face slick with sweat. He's drawing massive amounts of power directly from the ship's core to sustain the uplink. He's fighting a war in there. The Admiral watched, his professional composure cracking to reveal the terrified man beneath. Malachor's body was rigid in the command throne, his face a mask of supreme concentration, but a single trickle of blood ran from beneath the golden helmet. On the bridge of the Stardust Drifter, the lights died completely. The hum of the Singularity Core faded to a painful, intermittent whisper. The last of the crystalline trees in the Arboretum went dark, their song finally silenced. The ship was dying, and with it, Kaelin's physical body. The life support readings on his command chair flickered from green to yellow to a deep, ominous red. He had minutes, at most, before his body failed and his consciousness was permanently severed, trapped in the archive to be hunted down by Malachor for eternity. He had one last chance. In the data space, Kaelin had become a sun. The combined light of thousands of Ethel minds poured into him, a blinding sphere of pure information. He was no longer just a man, or even a living library. He was the complete, embodied soul of his people. Malachor paused, his blade of nothingness held at the ready. sensing the shift in the battle. The Ethel were no longer resisting. They were consolidating. He prepared for a final, massive assault, but Kalen did not attack. He opened himself. He projected no images, no arguments, no defenses. He simply took the entirety of his civilization, the joy of a child seeing a nebula for the first time, the quiet satisfaction of a scientist solving a century-old equation, love between two souls expressed in a song, the unbearable grief of their extinction, and focused it into a single, irresistible beam aimed directly at Malakor's consciousness. It was not an attack. It was an invitation, a forced empathy. He was not trying to show Malakor that he was wrong. He was going to make him feel what it was to be Ethel. He was going to pour a universe of harmony, wonder, and sorrow into the cracks of Malakor's perfect, rigid certainty and see if the man, or the idea, would break first. The beam of pure being struck the Lord Arbiter, and for the first time, Malakor's impassive form recoiled. He was no longer an observer deleting data. He was a participant, drowning in a sea of experience that his philosophy had declared impossible. He was feeling the truth, and his mind, built on a foundation of absolute lies, began to scream. The moment the beam of pure ethel consciousness struck Lord Arbiter Malakor, the data space fractured. It was no longer a battle of constructs and logic, but a brutal, intimate invasion of the soul. Malakor, the architect of a galaxy-spanning truth, found his own mind besieged by a reality he had spent a lifetime denying. He felt the quiet joy of an ethel astronomer witnessing the birth of a star, not as a tactical asset or a resource, but as a moment of profound, sacred beauty. He experienced the frustration and eventual elation of a composer finally finding the last note to a symphony designed to mimic the gravitational waves of a binary pulsar. He was inundated with 1,000,000 lifetimes of love, curiosity, grief, and wonder emotions his rigid dogma had classified as weaknesses, as conceptual flaws. For a mind built on the unyielding certainty of a single truth, this forced empathy was torture. He saw the world through Kalen's eyes, felt the millennium of crushing loneliness, the cold ache of being the last of his kind. He felt the weight of an entire civilization's memory, not as a burden, but as a legacy of love. He saw his own Dominion ships, the instruments of his great truth, not as saviors, but as brutal, unthinking destroyers, silencing a song they could not be bothered to understand. His mind, a fortress of logic, began to crack under the strain. He tried to fight back, to impose his own reality. He projected images of galactic chaos, of warring alien species, of civilizations collapsing under the weight of their own internal conflicts. This is the universe without order. His thought broadcasted a desperate roar of defiance. This is the chaos you would have embraced. Stagnation, extinction. I gave the galaxy purpose. But his projections were no longer solid. They wavered, becoming transparent. And through them, the persistent, gentle light of the ethel experience shone through. An image of a Dominion fleet bombarding a primitive world was overlaid with the memory of an ethel science team making first contact, not with weapons, but with shared knowledge of the stars. The contrast was a paradox he could not resolve. Purpose is not a thing to be given, Kalen's thought, now amplified by the voices of all the echoes, replied. It was not an attack, but a simple, devastating statement. It is a thing to be discovered. You did not offer the galaxy purpose. You offered it a cage and called it safety. The blade of black data in Malakor's hand began to flicker. its absolute nothingness compromised by the influx of new contradictory experience. He was a man drowning in an ocean of truths he had declared to be lies. And then, Kalen showed him the final memory. He projected the moment of his own creation as a living archive. He made Malachor feel the terror and desperate hope of his parents as they placed their only son into a cryopod, downloading the essence of their entire culture into his mind. Malachor felt the unbearable love of a father and mother sacrificing themselves, not for vengeance, but for the simple, desperate belief that their story deserved to be remembered. This final, personal truth broke through the last of Malachor's defenses. The Lord Arbiter, the unyielding zealot, the voice of the Dominion, we screamed. It was not a cry of rage or defiance, but of pure, existential agony. His informational form convulsed, the black and gold armor cracking and falling away to reveal the raw and fractured consciousness beneath. The rigid grid of the data space shattered around him, and the vortex of the Warden program, which had been held at bay, now deprived of its master's commanding will, collapsed in on itself with a final, screeching hiss of static. The great truth, without the mind of its architect to sustain it, had erased itself. The battle was over. The data space fell silent, the static sky clearing to reveal a calm, endless sea of potential. The echoes, thousands of them, stood in the quiet light, their forms solid and whole. They were free, but the victory was costly. Kalen's own form, the sun that had channeled the Ethel's collective soul, was fading rapidly. The connection to his physical body was fraying. The last threads of life stretched to their breaking point. Kalen, Lyra's thought was gentle, filled with a sorrowful gratitude. You have done it. You have freed us, but the ship, your body, they are failing. In the physical world, on the bridge of the verdict, the scene was one of chaos and disbelief. The consciousness uplink helmet on Malachor's head sparked and smoked, and a flatline tone echoed from his biomonitors. The Lord Arbiter was dead, his mind shattered by a concept it could not contain. The Admiral stared, horrified, at the data readouts from the Kronos archive. The core programming was rewriting itself. Millennia of redacted files were being restored. The carefully constructed lies of the Dominion were being systematically replaced by the unfiltered, unedited history of the Ethel. The truth was being reborn. A communications officer, his voice trembling, turned to the Admiral. "Sir, we are receiving a broadcast from the archive. It's being sent galaxy-wide on all emergency frequencies, across the Dominion, on 100 worlds and 1,000 warships." Screens lit up. It was not a message of war or a declaration of victory. It was a song, a complex, beautiful Ethel symphony, the one Kalen had remembered his mother humming, and woven into the music, translated into 10,000 languages, was a simple text, "We remember." The stasis field around the Kronos archive, its power source severed by Malachor's feedback loop, flickered and died. The cage was open, and inside, the Stardust Drifter floated, dark and silent, a tomb once more, back in the data space. Kalen felt the last of his strength leaving him. His informational form was becoming transparent, dissolving into the sea of data around him. The echoes gathered around, their light a warm, comforting presence. Is this it? Then, Kalen's thought was faint, a whisper on the edge of oblivion. "It is not an end, Kalen," Lyra replied, her form moving closer. "It is a transformation. Your body is gone, But your consciousness, the archive you carried, it is here. It has merged with us. You are no longer the library. You are part of the story." And she and the other echoes reached out, not with hands, but with their very being. They enveloped him, sharing their own collective consciousness, cushioning his transition. The pain and the loneliness of 1,000 years faded, replaced by a sense of belonging so profound it was like coming home after an eternity in exile. "What happens now?" he asked, his sense of self beginning to dissolve into the greater whole. "Now." Lyra's voice was the last thing he heard as an individual. "We begin. The Dominion will not fall in a day, a lie that old has deep roots. But we have planted the seed of truth. We will be the guardians of memory. We will be a whisper on the Galactic network, a ghost in their machine, offering the truth to any who are brave enough to listen. And the Stardust Drifter, your noble ship, will be our monument, our first testament." His last sensation was one of peace. He was no longer Kalen, the last of the Ethel. He was a note in the symphony, a word in the story, an eternal part of the people he had saved. He was home. The final command Kalen had given the Drifter before entering the data space was a simple one, a contingency for this very outcome. If his biosign ceased for more than 5 minutes, the ship was to execute its final protocol. As his consciousness merged fully with the echoes, the ancient Ethel ship, floating silently before the now liberated Kronos archive, began to glow. A soft, blue light emanated from within, not from its engines, but from the very metal of its hull. The crystalline trees in the arboretum, long since dark, flared to life one last time, their chiming light a final, beautiful farewell. The ship did not explode. It simply sublimated. The hull, the engines, the command chair, the empty cryopod, it all dissolved into a cloud of shimmering, intelligent light, a nebula of memory that slowly, gracefully, enveloped the silver moon of the archive. It became a permanent shroud, a testament to the last voyage of the last Ethel, a constant, beautiful reminder of the truth that had been returned to the galaxy. The death of an idea is quieter than the death of a man, but its echoes are infinitely louder. On the bridge of the verdict, the flatline tone of Lord Arbiter Malakor's biomonitor was a punctuation mark at the end of an era. Admiral Zalen, a veteran of 100 sterile campaigns, stood frozen, not by fear, but by a profound and terrifying sense of clarity. He had just witnessed the foundational pillar of his civilization turn to dust. The galaxy-wide broadcast from the Kronos archive was not a declaration of war. It was a eulogy. The Ethel Symphony, complex and heartbreakingly beautiful, was now the anthem of a new age, and it was playing over the grave of the great truth. Zalen looked at the faces of his crew, young, indoctrinated, their expressions a mixture of confusion and horror. They had been trained to fight ships and to quell rebellions, to enforce order. They had no protocol for fighting a song. "Shut it down," he ordered, his voice a dry rasp. A communications officer, his fingers trembling over his console, shook his head. "I can't. Admiral, it's not a signal we can jam. It's embedded. It's coming from the core of the archive's own network. To stop it, we'd have to destroy the archive itself." Zalen stared at the holographic display. He saw the silver moon, now shrouded in a soft, ethereal nebula of blue and silver light, the ghost of the ship that had brought this reckoning. The Stardust Drifter was gone, yet it was more present than ever. It was a monument, a tomb, and a warning. Before he could issue his next command, A priority message flashed on his screen, routed directly from the Dominion High Command on Pretoria. The sender was Grand Marshal Crane, Malakor's successor, a man known for a pragmatism so brutal it bordered on nihilism. The message was simple and absolute. The Kronos Archive has been compromised by a mimetic plague. The Lord Arbiter has fallen. Enact Protocol Umbra. Sterilize the moon and all surrounding space. No survivors. No witnesses. Preserve the truth. Zalen read the order once, then a second time. Preserve the truth. The words were ashes in his mouth. He had just seen the truth shatter the mind of its greatest champion. He looked at the nebula surrounding the archive, and for the first time, he did not see a tactical problem to be solved. He saw a graveyard d'étoiles, and he heard a song, and he felt the profound weight of a lie he had served his entire life. He made a choice. "Helm," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound, dangerous authority. "Take us out of the system. Slow burn. Do not engage. Communications officer. Log a sensor malfunction. State that Protocol Umbra cannot be executed until repairs are complete. Relay that log to the fleet and then observe strict calm silence." The bridge was silent for a heart-stopping moment as the crew processed the Admiral's act of quiet, monumental treason. Then, without a word, they complied. The verdict, the flagship of the Zenith fleet, turned its back on the burning heart of its own empire and slipped away into the darkness. The ripple effect of the broadcast was a slow, inexorable tide. On worlds across the Dominion, the initial reaction was disbelief, followed by outrage not at the Ethel, but at their own leaders. Historians sequestered themselves, frantically cross-referencing the newly liberated data, finding their life's work to be a carefully constructed fiction. Military units on occupied worlds found their authority dissolving, the local populace looking at them not with fear, but with a new, questioning pity. The Dominion did not collapse in fire and rebellion. It began to fray at the edges. A slow unraveling of belief. The High Command, led by Grand Marshal Crane, doubled down. They declared the archive a forbidden zone, a source of conceptual contagion. They amplified their propaganda, painting Kalen as a spectral terrorist and the broadcast as his final act of psychic warfare. But it was too late. The seed of truth had been planted in too many minds. Within the data space of the Kronos Archive, a new consciousness had fully awakened. It was no longer a collection of fragmented echoes and one living archive. It was a singular, unified mind, a vast and serene intelligence born from the merging of thousands of Ethel and the last of their children, Kalen. It did not have a name, but those who would later come to commune with it would call it the Cygnus Mind. Kalen's individuality was gone, but his purpose was now the purpose of all. His loneliness was replaced by a perfect communion, his grief transformed into a vast, compassionate memory. The Cygnus Mind did not feel anger or the desire for revenge. It felt only a profound sense of responsibility. It had become the custodian of a truth that the galaxy desperately needed. Its first act was not to attack, but to listen. It opened itself, becoming a passive repository. Any ship, any individual, any government that sent a query to the Kronos Archive received an answer, the pure, unadulterated truth, supported by millennia of raw data. A fleet, dispatched by Grand Marshal Crane to carry out the sterilization order that Zalen had refused, arrived weeks later. It was a fleet of zealots and hardliners, ships crewed by those who still clung to the old lies. As they powered up their weapons, preparing to glass the silver moon, the Cygnus Mind responded. It did not erect shields or fire weapons. and simply reached out and spoke to the crews, not with words, but with their own lost histories, and to the ships from the Kel-Terran sector, showed them the records of their pre-Dominion culture, a peaceful society of artisans that the Dominion had forcibly militarized, erasing their past. To the commander of the fleet, a man who prided himself on his pure, unwavering loyalty, it showed him the unedited record of his own grandfather's court-martial and execution for questioning the official account of the Ethel's fall. It offered no commentary, no judgment. It simply held up a mirror. The fleet commander did not fire. He ordered his fleet to stand down and hold its position. His mind, like Zalen's before him, reeling from the sudden, sickening collapse of his world. Years turned into decades. The Dominion did not end, but it was forever changed. It became a hollow thing, a shell of its former glory, fractured into dozens of competing factions. Some sectors, led by hardliners like Crane, clung to the lie, becoming isolated and paranoid kingdoms. Others, led by reformists like Admiral Zalen, broke away, forming new alliances and seeking to build a future based on the new, difficult truths. The galaxy entered a tumultuous, uncertain era that was known as the Great Reckoning, and at the center of it all, the Kronos Archive became a point of pilgrimage, shrouded in the perpetually shimmering light of the sublimated Stardust Drifter. It was a beacon for scholars, for the disillusioned, for the seekers of truth. Ships from 1,000 different worlds came not to conquer or to fight, but simply to ask questions and to listen. The Cygnus Mind, the silent chorus of the Ethel and their final son, remained. It did not rule or command God. It simply remembered. It was a living monument, a permanent testament to the fact that you can bury a civilization, you can rewrite its history, and you can silence its people, but you can never, not truly, kill a song. The universe, it turned out, did sing. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the galaxy was finally learning to listen.